A lot of people have done these videos. You've probably seen a bunch of these out there on BookTube. Answer a couple of questions about what you've been reading this year so far, what stands out. Okay, so first question is, what is the best book that I've read in 2024? And here, I kind of cheated and I picked 5 books. I've got 3 of them here. 2 of them were library books. The first one here is Flatland by Edwin Abbott. And I've got a really long review written on my computer. I've been meaning to put a video together about this book, but my ambitions for this video really outpaced my ability to. So I rewrote the last half of this book. I wrote a screenplay based on the second half of this book. Let me just put it that way. And I was going to animate turn it into about a 15-minute animated feature and then embed that feature into the rest of my review. And the whole concept just got completely away from me, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. But there should be a video on Flatland coming out. Another one of the books that I read that I would put at the top of my list this year is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I cannot believe it has taken me 44 years of my life to read this book, but it has. So, like everybody who reads this book, I was sort of devastated. It is bleak, as everybody says it is, but it is also, there's some real touching, wholesome moments between the father and son here that makes the whole thing bearable. This is a dark, bleak, awful book, and I loved it. All right, and then the other one that I'd put at the top of my list is We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. This book has seen a resurgence. I'd never heard of this book until it started getting popular on some of the more thoughtful BookTube channels that I watch. Very pleased to come across this book. Definitely a prototype for the likes of Brave New World and Anthem by Ayn Rand in 1984. I would love to do a video comparison of those 4 books. Let me know downstairs in the comments what you think. Would you like to see a video of me comparing We with 1984 with Brave New World and Anthem? Those are, I believe that We deserves to be discussed in the same breath as those other books. So the other 2 books that I put on the list that I don't have copies of because they were library books is Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. Finally got around to reading, and I read it twice in one day. It's a very short book. It's more of a novella. It's like 110 pages, 120 pages, something like that. And I finished it, and I immediately started back over at the beginning and read through the whole thing a second time. It's one of those books that definitely rewards a reread. There's hints along the way that kind of indicate what is coming at the end of the story. I should have seen that coming, but I didn't. And it kind of reads like Steinbeck, but it's so short. It's like Steinbeck without the 10-page digressions into the flaxen color of wheat. Train Dreams is a very concise, great American novel. It is superb. Okay. And then the last book that I put on my best books that I've read in 2024 so far list is The Son of the Middle Border by Hamlin Garland. This is an author that I've been meaning to read for a long time. He's actually from my hometown in Iowa, a very small town. We don't have a lot of famous people coming out of there. Hamlin Garland lived in Osage, Iowa. I guess this would have been about 5 years or so after the end of the Civil War. And so he and his family moved there from Wisconsin. They broke ground on a new farm, homesteaded in that area. I lived there 100 years after he did. So a lot of the locations that he's talking about don't really exist anymore. But anyway, Son of the Middle Border is a memoir of Hamlin Garland's early life. I would really put this up there with the likes of like Roughing It by Mark Twain. It's kind of in that category. And Hamlin Garland's writing holds his own. He may not be as good as Mark Twain or like a Stephen Crane or some of his other contemporaries. What I'm trying to say is what I really love about this book is that if I hadn't been from the same hometown as Hamlin Garland, I would have heard of it. He was really popular for a time in the United States, but his books are no longer really remembered. In fact, I just think it's cool that there's all these books out there that I may have never heard of that are really outstanding. It doesn't have to be part of the Western canon. It doesn't have to be part of, pop culture anymore. There's so many forgotten books out there, and I love to be able to discover them. Kind of a forgotten gem that I wanted to highlight on this list. Okay, so moving on to the next question is the best sequel that I've read so far this year. And I wouldn't say that they're sequels, but they are a continuation of a series. Anthony Horowitz, who's known for his murder mysteries, he wrote a trilogy of James Bond novels. I don't know if he's done with those or if there's going to be more that have come out. I hope that there are, because these 3 James Bond novels were really quite good. It's With a Mind to Kill, Trigger Mortis, and Forever and a Day. Of the 3, I would say that Forever and a Day was my favorite, but if you're looking for one that has the most potential to become a film, I would say Trigger Mortis it's a great title too, but that's the one that has the most potential to maybe become a movie. A lot of really great stuff in that book. Car racing, James Bond gets buried alive. There's a really cool flashback to the Korean War. So this is post World War II, and now it's post Korean War. So this is early era James Bond. Really cool stuff about the space race. Very cool, very fast paced, pretty short book. But again, Forever and a Day was probably my favorite. All right, so the next one that on the list here is new releases that I haven't read yet. I don't really keep up with a lot of new releases, but a book that has come out this year that I really want to read is The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones. It's book 3 of the Indian Lake trilogy that includes My Heart is a Chainsaw and Don't Fear the Reaper. I haven't read any of these books, but I have read 2 other Stephen Graham Jones books. I read Mongrels, and I read The Only Good Indians. Both books are phenomenal, and if you like the horror genre and you like to see what really great writers are doing with the genre today, you've got to check out Stephen Graham Jones. I'm really looking forward to this Indian Lake trilogy. I've heard nothing but rave reviews of all these books. But that comes to the next question, which is my most anticipated release later on in the second half of this year. And that's got to go to Dissonance by Sean Hamill. I read his first book, which I've got right here, actually. This is The Cosmology of Monsters. This is sort of a literary horror novel. God, this was a good book. I would like to reread this and talk about it a little more in depth on this channel. I might have read this in probably 2 sittings. Anyway, I'm not talking about Cosmology of Monsters. I'm talking about Dissonance, which is my most anticipated release in the second half of this year. Dissonance, I know nothing about. I know not a thing about it. I'm really excited to go into this one completely blind. I pre-ordered it, and I know that I said in a previous video that I wasn't going to buy any more books, but this one I pre-ordered way back in like April. I already gave my money to it, so when that one shows up, I mean, it's going to be any time now. What's the release date of Dissonance? All right, so this says that it'll be out on July 23rd, which is in 2 days. So I've got 2 days to fit in another book, which might actually, let me grab this one, which is probably going to be Dr. Sax by Jack Kerouac, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So, okay, all right, so the next question is, what was my biggest disappointment so far this year? I would have to say, and I talked about this book in another video, and I don't want to just dump on it too hard, but that was Wild and Distant Seas by Tara Carr Roberts. This book is sort of a tangential story to Moby Dick. It is very much its own thing, though. It's not a retelling. It's nothing of that sort. I thought that maybe there was going to be more elements of Moby Dick in Wild and Distant Seas. I was disappointed about that, but that was just my own misapprehension. I guess the thing that really bothered me the most about the book, though, is that there's a magical element to the book, we'll say, that isn't very well explored. explained, or executed. And those three E's are very important. All right, so moving on, which is my biggest surprise of the year, which has to be A Study in Brimstone by G.S. Denning. Study in Brimstone features not Sherlock Holmes, but Warlock Holmes. And now this is a retelling of A Study in Scarlet, the first Arthur Conan Doyle's Study in Scarlet, the first novel in his Sherlock Holmes series. But it's told now, instead of a sleuth, he's a warlock. He's a wizard of sorts. And he receives his information from beyond. And he tries to pass off this supernatural ability as very comically as as his keen observation, as his own personal observations, his own deduction. But now that very pragmatic, simple everyman Watson now is renting a flat with a warlock who's out of his mind. And it was just a lot of fun. All right, so the next one is my favorite new author. I'm just going to jump onto Hamlin Garland on this one. I read Son of the Middle Border, but I also, while I was at the library in the research room, they pulled out 3 or 4 of his other books, and I kind of flipped through some of them. One of those books was a book of poetry, which is it's mostly nature poetry. I am really looking forward to reading some more by Hamlin Garland. So, all right, so my newest favorite characters got to come from We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. This is the main character is D503, Delta 503. Their names, they're sequential, they're serial numbers basically. They refer to each other as numbers in this book. For when it was written, it was a very transgressive idea that a person could be reduced, completely stripped of their identity in such a way, and just cataloged. What I like about this character is that he starts the book and ends the book in essentially the same place, but in the middle he transforms a great deal, and his fall from his transformation by the end of the book is a tragedy. It's a real tragedy, and I felt a lot in that downfall of his. That first third of the book, as the scales are falling from his eyes, was just fantastic. It was a fantastic read. He's living a life that I couldn't possibly understand in this utopian other world. It's like that takes place 600 years in the future or something like that. It's nothing that I could hope to understand. But his character and his awakening is something that I think we can all understand. I think we've all had some kind of moment in our lives where we realize that the thing that we've been taught, or a system of thought that has been put forth as the norm for our whole lives, when that crumbles and when we see through it for the first time, when we see through that veil, that's something that we can all identify with. Okay, so the next question is the book that made me cry. I don't typically cry during books. I'm not saying I'm a man and I don't cry. I do. I just watched Coco with my son's little brother. He's 8 years old, and he wanted to watch Coco with me. And we're getting toward the end. He's seen it a million times. So we're getting toward the end, and when the emotional climax comes on screen, he's like looking over at me like, "Are you crying?" And like, I'm trying not to cry, but I got the biggest freaking lump in my throat. Coco was a very good movie. Books don't do that to me very often, but they do occasionally. But the book that I probably had the strongest emotional reaction to this year was All Day is a Long Time by David Sanchez. This is a book about a young man in the throes of addiction down on the Gulf Coast of Florida, scrimping and scraping, getting by any way that he can. I found a lot to be identifiable in this young man. I would say that the raw outpouring of genuine emotion from this character in this book could only be autobiographical. A significant portion of the redemption arc in All Day is a Long Time has to do with literature and the love of reading and literature. That is absolutely something that I can identify with. When I am at my worst, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, when I am at my lowest point, I take refuge in books. I take instruction from books. I take wisdom and solace and comfort and company from books. And if you're here watching this far into a video, I'm sure that you can identify with that as well. All right, so books that I need to read by the end of the year. I've read Visions of Gerard by Jack Kerouac, and I am currently reading Dr. Sachs. And then, as you can see from this camera right here, I've got all these other Kerouac books. These are the Deleuze Legend, a series of 14 books, Romana Clef books, based on Jack Kerouac's real life. And ever since I was about 15 years old when I read my first Jack Kerouac book, which was The Dharma Bums, I wanted to go back to the beginning and read all of his Deleuze Legend in chronological order. Not the order that he published them in or wrote them in, but in chronological order from the beginning of his life right up to his tragic end. I've never done it. I've always wanted to do it. So I'm doing it now. That's what I want to get through by the end of the year. I'm not going to read them all back to back to back. I don't think I could handle 14 Kerouacs in a row. So I'm interspersing it with other books. And then the last question in the book is my favorite my favorite book to movie adaptation that I read this year. And I've only read 2 books this year that I know of that were adapted into films. And one of them is The Road, and the other is It by Stephen King. And I've got to say that The Road is the best adapted book into a film. Those are a bunch of books that I've read so far this year. I've read something like 44 books so far in the first half of the year. I've got plans to read quite a lot more. We'll see what comes up. I've been mood reading a whole lot lately and not really reading with a lot of focus, which is what this Kerouac project is about. And I've also got a number of, like I mentioned about the Flatland video, I've got a bunch of reviews and other video ideas that I've been building that I just haven't been able to put together because I don't have the time. I've been sick a lot, and working full time outside of being sick it's just a huge demand on my time. So I just don't have the time to put together these enormous video projects. So I'm probably going to have to abandon those big projects and then just reduce their scope and present just a standard review to you guys. So you can expect a bunch of those videos in the coming weeks. And until then, I guess read something good and get you some good coffee and get you a big mug and just enjoy a big mug of coffee, you know?